Good evening. Welcome to episode 3 of the RRI. I'm Brad.
I'm Jace.
So we just want to take a moment to thank you guys for continuing to come back, episode 3, and thank you for standing by as we work out our audio bugs and things like that.
It's been a learning curve for sure, but it's been nice to see the support and feedback so far, and just hoping to see it grow and keep telling us your stories, keep telling us what you think of it all, and that'll help us a long way.
Yeah. Feedback's super important, so we thank you. So tonight with episode 3, we're going to be talking about this thing called the work-life balance, right? How do we balance the work week with our freedom? It's kind of the best question you can really pose.
Yeah, I mean, especially if we want to get right into it, especially for first responders or people who work shift work, right? Work-life balance can't and isn't always easy. How do you manage it? How do you do it? So a lot of it's easier said than done, but we'll get into that for sure.
So some of these questions that I have jotted down are rhetorical questions, but some I actually want you to answer or try to answer them for our fan base. So how many hours in a week do you give your agency?
No less than 40 per week.
Okay. And
but
then
sometimes could be up to 50. Well, not up to 50. Could be more than 50. It's usually overtime incorporated.
Yep. And how much of your time, is quote unquote donated to taking overtime because you understand the need of having the shifts filled?
More than I'd like to admit to sometimes. I also like to think of travel time in that as well. I have a long drive. 1 hour each way, so 2 hours a day. You times that by the 4 shifts, and that's almost a whole nother shift that I'm just traveling to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that the hard part is that you're giving to a company, an agency that you appreciate and that appreciates you, right? It's mutual, but what happens tomorrow when something happens to you and you get hospitalized or you die? What happens?
They're filling your shift.
They're going to fill the shift either way,
spot.
right?
Yep.
And it's out of no disrespect of any agency. It's got to happen. It's business as usual. Absolutely. It has to be. That's one of the downsides of public safety is that you can't stop rolling just because you lose somebody.
Operational needs.
Right.
24-hour service, you need to have those staffed.
Yep. And not so much nowadays, where we are now, but how much time of the overtime that you've worked is, forced overtime. You're being told that you'll be there, which is involuntarily taking you away from family time, friend time, your own personal time.
Yeah. So specifically from last employment, it was heavy. It was a lot of the forced while I was at work, for sure. I remember my first year, I think I probably worked more forced overtime than my regular shift for a couple months. And when I became a supervisor, luckily it could have been worse for sure, but I did have a lot of times where I was forced in from home, which ruins everything, so it makes you wonder on your days off, if you're going to get forced in or not. You never know. And but it was a lot of time, a lot of given time.
Again, it goes back to operational need, right? And as an administrator, I can understand that, like, I've got to fill that seat and I've got to have someone at that phone and on those radios. Me personally, I've been there before, so I don't feel the same way. But now being on that side of it, I see it from both sides, and there's no easy way.
Right.
So, but yeah, the forced overtime is tough, right? Like, you're being told now that you will come in and you will work the shift, or you're going to stay over. You're not going home to pick up your kid from school. You're not going home to see your spouse, things like that.
It definitely changes your mentality too. Like, working the forced overtime seems a lot harder than working a shift that you willingly picked up, right? I mean, it for some reason just change your mindset. It changes everything. It ruins your plans sometimes. So it tends to be a lot harder mentally and in the long run physically.
And, it's part of that is when we all got into this career field, we were told that, you're going to be working nights, holidays, weekends, overtime, things like that, right? Where every one of us has been told that, and we all essentially agreed to it, right?
Of course.
But I don't think we all agreed at that time that we were going to let it take over our lives, which it really does, to a certain degree, especially when you're short-staffed. When you're full-staffed, I think you're okay. You can get by for the most part without ever getting forced or without really having to worry about overtime unless it's voluntary.
Yep.
But you get to the short-staffed side of things, and that's not the story at all, and everything goes south. Everything becomes miserable very quickly, and you get that one person who's actually sick tomorrow, and now they don't want to call out because they feel bad because someone else is going to get forced.
Mm-hmm. Or let's skip right to burnout too, right? So the employees that are working those regular shifts plus overtime plus forced overtime, they're getting burnt out, and then a bad situation becomes even worse because you're starting to lose more people due to burnout. It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it is. And then, you go and talk about, again, the place that we last came from, and there was a certain set amount of overtime that you could voluntarily take. I think we were allowed to take up to 24 hours for safety, but then you could get forced for an additional 24, or who knows, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And again, that was I don't think that was in anyone's control, but it's operational need versus the safety of an employee. A handful of years ago, we had a jailer that was leaving after a long shift, and we've talked about this before, that hit and killed somebody on his way home.
Yeah.
Is that his fault? No. Is that his agency's fault? No. It's just a terrible turn of events. Right.
It's a disconnect between operational needs and employee needs.
Yeah.
There needs to be some type of balance, and the hard part is finding that balance, right? You need to staff your center 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. And if you're shorthanded, you have to find different ways to work those shifts. And unfortunately, it's at the employee's expense.
Yeah, and at the expense of their children. I mean, one of the girls that we worked with at our last job, she would work 16 hours and then go pick up her kids, go to school, go to hockey, go to cheer practice, all this stuff, and then come back to work that night. And, fortunately, we were in a position where there were enough of us there that could help her get through the shift, but that's not okay. She still has to be a mom. She still has to be a wife, and we're working her, especially on the involuntary stuff, we're working her to the bone, and then she still has to go do that stuff. That doesn't change.
No.
You leave, you still have those responsibilities to people.
Yeah.
Everybody on the road that you're passing too, and you're now a hazard to everybody else.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So,
and then, like you said, who does it come back on? Not to talk about liability this whole time, but come on. I mean, you have to think the employee was just doing what they thought they had to do. Or maybe even, how about this? So how many shifts did you take on holidays to work just because of the pay? Because you needed that money?
Yeah, absolutely. Plenty.
Yep. What does that do to your family?
Right.
What does that do for the relationships with them? Is it really worth sacrificing that time for a bigger paycheck? At the time, I'm sure you needed that money. I've been there. I've done that. I got to pick up that shift. I have to. Right? Where do we draw that line?
Yeah, and even with that, you get home Christmas morning and you have, again, I say a lot of quoting, but you have, quote, the day off, but you really just have the morning off to enjoy Christmas. And now you come home from a crappy overnight shift where a bunch of stuff happened, and now you've got to put on that face. You've got to fake who you are to get through Christmas.
Well, and that's after being up for 16 plus hours.
Right.
Sometimes, when do you sleep? When do you do anything? You're not at your top tier person when you're that tired.
No.
That overworked.
So
where do we balance it?
Right. And here we are for, here's for our listeners to consider, and chime in on any comment forum that you can, or feel free to shoot us a message. But how many of you work night shift, second, third shift, or some variation? You work 2 to 10, 10 to 6, or, 12 to 12 or 6 to 6. There's some variation of overnight shifters here that are listening to this. I've been one for, about 18 years out of the 20 years I've been in this, and But here's the funny question here. The moment of truth is, how many of you have talked yourself into believing that you actually enjoy it now? Just because you've gotten quote unquote used to it, right? Or have you
Yeah.
gotten used to it because you have to, not because you enjoy it, right? I think you can make the best out of a shift for sure. And I think you're going to make those choices that, I'm still going to hang out with my kids today, regardless of how tired I am. You're going to do that. You really are. And I know you are. You're great parents. You're great spouses, but they're not going to get the best version of you.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
That's the important thing to remember is you're going to do it. You will never fail. You will always do it because you're a parent, you're a spouse, you're a friend, you're a brother, sister, but you're not giving them the best version of you. They're going to hear the cynical side of you come out. They're going to see your, random road rage because you're pissy and tired, or it gets to the extreme where you get out of work and you start abusing alcohol because that's the only thing that's going to keep you going for the day, right? Or you're just drinking Red Bulls from the time you get out to the time you go to bed.
Yeah, we can extend that too. Like, how about habits, right? We can go through a whole list of habits. Let's start with sleep. When do you find time to sleep as a night shifter? Are you getting enough sleep? Is it quality sleep? Let's go to food. Are we eating healthy? Working these overnight shifts, shift work, period, even day shift. Are there are so few options for food while at work. And if you eat out, it costs an arm and a leg. You can meal prep. That's another thing that you could do to help. But again, that's a lot of money. It's even more time to take during your days off. I just don't, this is all so much easier said than done sometimes than to actually, we could preach it all day long and say, hey, this is how you need to overcome the shift work burden, but it's not that easy. We have so many other things that are going on.
No, because you're right. And what do you have competing with, meal prepping? You've got DoorDash, you can order around the clock, the worst food in the world, the best tasting at the time, but it's always met with instant regret afterwards, right? But, for you, for instance, have kind of come up with a solution to that with what are those meals you get? They're like prepped for you.
Yeah, kind of. It's HelloFresh. They send you ingredients, food, meats and stuff, and you have to find time to cook those. And I do, but again, it's another burden because it's not only cooking those meals, but it's the dishes afterwards. It's the packaging. It's the bringing it to work and then maybe not craving that at work, but you have to eat it because I'm not going to waste it. So, but yeah, it has been helpful in saving money and trying to get past eating out every day. We like I said, it costs an arm and leg to get DoorDash or Grubhub or whatever, but there's no other options sometimes.
Yeah, it's almost like that should come as part of our benefits package nowadays is a DoorDash gift card when you sign on. But
yeah, I know that would be nice, right? It wouldn't last very long.
So yeah, you're right. There's all those challenges, and I think that we could go all day on habits.
Of course.
And again, I was saying like I had done a variation of night shifts my entire career. I picked the one that worked best for my family, which at one point was noon to midnight. And then when my kids started getting older and into school, the overnight shift just made sense for me. I mean, none of them worked, but I made them work because I had to.
Yeah, we see that with a lot of parents in this field, I feel like.
Yeah, and you spend your
you're
days
compromising. You compromise your own mental health and physical health just so you can see your kids.
Yeah, and you spend that day as a zombie, as as grumpy, as much of an asshole as anyone would ever want you not to be is what you are. And you don't mean to do it. There's no intention behind it. Like my wife, Amy put up with me for a lot of years being just a complete grump on my days off because I would go and sleep 3 or 4 hours and then I'd wake up and think, oh, I'll have the rest of my day. Well, the rest of my day was miserable because I'm still trying to wake up the entire time.
Yeah, that was going to be my next thing. So, like, are your days off even worth it at that point? For a lot of us, most of the time we have 2 days off after our work week, right? And the first day is usually for night shifters, for shift workers. It's the first day is usually spent sleeping, You have to catch up on sleep somewhere. It's not really possible to catch up, but you're getting some extra sleep usually, depending on your family situation. And then the next day is spent getting ready for the next work week, right? When you were in those situations, Brad, did you ever actually find time to enjoy those days off? And if so, how did you do it?
Honestly, day one off was typically a never. We would fill it with stuff like, if you're lucky enough to land your days off on a weekend or a part of a weekend, then you could really start to plan. But that's part of the whole shift work thing, is that your days off are going to be midweek when everyone else is at work. So that it's a benefit, it's a blessing and a curse if you think about it, because it gives you time to get your stuff done, but you're also losing all that time with family and friends. So
Yep.
my first day on overnight shift was completely wasted, because some days I would be up by 10 or 11. Some days I would hit my alarm and go back to bed till 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So now I've failed to get off that night shift rotation, and then the next day I'm just back in the same position because I'm not going to bed till 2 or 3 in the morning now.
Yeah.
And then
And again, that brings us back to the sleep issue, though. That first scenario you're talking about, that's 4 hours of sleep. That's not good sleep.
No, it never is. And it's summertime and it's 80 degrees out. All you want to do is go out and hop in the pool, or go do things that you've been needing to do all week. Your vehicle's dirty. You want to clean it out. You want to do all this stuff, and now you're just struggling to get out of bed.
What about connecting with people? Personally, I feel it's been really hard to connect with folks, because when I'm working, everyone else is home getting ready for their night, and they go to bed and I'm still working while they're all sleeping. And then when I get home and go to bed, they're all waking up and starting their day. It's hard to connect with people when you're on almost exact opposite schedules, whether it be family, friends, wives, husbands, everything. It's hard.
I think that's why we find that we're more drawn to people in the field, because they understand it, they do it. I've got one. If you guys are listening, I'm sorry if I forgot one of you, but I've got like one solid friend outside of public safety that we've been friends for years. He understands my shift work and the crap work that I've done, because he's been around me since I started. But trying to make new friends outside of public safety while you're in public safety is like trying to explain this to somebody that's not in the field. Like, I'm sure nurses deal with it too. I'm sure doctors deal with it. Anyone who works shift work, I guess we should just word it that way. But
Absolutely.
You cannot explain shift work to someone who doesn't work shift work. They understand, they see the concept, they understand what the schedule looks like.
Of course.
But they don't understand what the days off and the mentality and the mental health issues look like.
Well, right. We're piling it on too. You're not only dealing with all the things we've already mentioned, you're also almost always underpaid, underappreciated. You're dealing with, exactly. You're dealing with wild things. People's worst days are what you're dealing with every single day, multiple times a day. That is a lot. How do we manage to not lose it constantly?
It makes you, it also makes you think that, I don't have a percentage here, which I told myself I wouldn't say that if I didn't have a number again, but a lot of our percent of our days are run off adrenaline, because you're sitting there waiting for that next big thing to come in, whether it's phone or, being a police officer, firefighter, EMT, you're waiting for that next big call to come in. Your adrenaline never really shuts off. And that is the most unhealthy. You cannot run on adrenaline. You do. It gets you through the next call. But that is not a healthy way to live. And that's why people are, you're looking at people who are severely overweight, or they're severely dehydrated, or they're going through all these mental health issues or medical issues in the public safety field, because we're not treating our bodies right. We're living for that adrenaline rush.
I was looking up something earlier that said experts say that shift work could have serious impact on your health in at least two ways. Some of it may be to do with your lifestyle that shift work encourages, which we can all probably relate to. And the rest is to do with your biology, like you were just talking about. The physical side of what shift work does to your body can be sometimes fatal. It's not easy.
No, and it's not definitely not what we're programmed for. So that definitely explains
Well,
it.
right. You said we talk, we run off adrenaline for a certain percentage of our day, which adrenaline will then make you more tired at the end of your shift. So you're working more than you need to. You're running off adrenaline the whole time. So you're already way past exhaustion, and then you're not sleeping nearly well enough just to get up and do it all again.
And yeah, and and I know, I think we've talked about this before, and I've told you about another group I was in. How just in America, divorce is at 50%. Doesn't matter who you are, what you're doing. Divorce is at 50%. Have you read any other stats or seen any other stats that make it more interesting in our field?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I actually did. So among married men fewer than 5 years, who have been married fewer than 5 years, with at least one child, working fixed nights, uh, made separation or divorce 6 times more likely than if you were working days. So let's just compare this. You were in your marriage, your first child 6 years ago, not when he was born, but when he was a toddler, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So with one child, so you would have been 6 times more likely to get divorced because you were working night shift. That's a little crazy to think, but let's also take it back a second, because it's not just men. Mothers married more than 5 years who work fixed night shifts were 3 times more likely than day shifters to experience separation or divorce. Those are some crazy numbers.
Yeah.
Just because of a schedule.
Right. Yeah.
Not to include everything else.
Right.
Yeah,
On top of
exactly.
an already big number, 50% is huge. 50%, it's either you're going to make it or you're not.
Yeah.
If we all stood at the altar and thought, are we going to make it 5 years? I don't think, why would we get married in the first place? That's not the question here. But you're literally going into a job where you're adding to that already stressful situation. Marriage isn't easy. Partnership isn't easy, but you work together and you figure stuff out. But if you're working overnights and you're just always grumpy, you're always pissy, you're always tired, you're not going to figure that stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a very, very patient wife. I have a very patient wife who gave me that grace to get me through those times, and allowed me to, she knew that when I woke up, she'd give me about an hour before she could talk to me, because she knew that I wasn't the best version of myself waking up. And I knew that, but I just never did anything about it.
So did that ever come from conversations you guys had? Or was that just type of body language stuff that she learned over time?
There were conversations about it for sure. And I think I had the blinders on for a lot of them, because I didn't, when you and I started talking about this stuff here, I don't think I really understood how much it impacted relationships, whether it be marriage or friendship or, father and son, anything.
Mm-hmm.
Once I realized how much it bothered her and it affected our communication, we knew something had to give.
Yeah.
So she really took a lot of time to understand my career and understand what I was doing and the things that I would do at work and why I would come home so tired and pissy. And I think she gave me a lot more grace than probably I deserve. But, there's only so much grace that someone can give you before you have to understand that you're not wrong, but we signed up for it, and we have to figure that stuff out on our own. Nobody else can fix that for us, right? We said, this is a job we want to do. We want to talk to people. We want to answer the phone when people are screaming for help, screaming bloody murder, telling us their child is dead, telling us their spouse is dead. That's what we are like. And I think it's important early on in the career, when we were training people, you and I both, or when we hire people, we tell them this job isn't probably what you think it's going to be.
It never is.
No, in that first night, you get, they the first time they ever pick up the phone, they get that CPR, and they got to listen to the old elderly woman listen to her husband die while she's trying to do CPR. That stuff, it impacts you immensely, and you do bring it home. Doesn't matter how much you want to leave it at the door. So having that understanding at home is the biggest thing you can do, talking about that with your shift work and your stress. And
yeah. And I think it's hard too, because I think our spouses, our relatives understand. They are proud of the work that's being done by us, right? There's no question about that, but they don't know how to help us. I think that's the biggest thing. They don't know how to help us. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to bring those stressors into their life because it's traumatic. Who wants to have to hear that stuff? You've talked about this before, you know. We're trying to hide that side of us from them, or that side of the world from them, especially with your kids. You know, you don't want them hearing about that stuff. And our spouses, again, want to be there. They want to be supportive, and they are supportive, but don't know how. And I think we're the biggest problem because of that, because we don't know how to sometimes communicate that. It's not something you can just say, hey, you know, communicate it so easily. It's very, very complicated, clearly.
Well, yeah, and you got those moments where, you know, we say like they want to help us, but they don't know how. I mean, 90% of the time, I don't think we know what we need.
Very good point. 100%.
Until you start to uncover what the root of the problem is, you know?
Yeah.
And it goes back to, you know, that the conference we went to with the guys from the Hog, and it was them talking about the balance of realizing that, you know, the three things that we've talked about so far on this podcast: stigma, identity, and now this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we can start to get these things under wraps and understand, like, we could beat the stigma. Our identity is not what we're doing for a job; it's who we are. And then, right, you know, talking about the stuff we're talking about today.
Yeah.
You bring awareness to this stuff, and people start to realize, like, oh, yeah, I'm not a cop on my days off, you know?
Yeah.
Or like, once I leave the 911 center, when I answer my cell phone, it doesn't have to be that heightened sense of awareness anymore. I can chill out, I can let it ride, or I can go and again, dealing with those tough calls or whatever, there's methods to recuperate, right? Again, we talked about it: massage, flotation therapy, music, golf, skiing, all those types of things.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. I was just thinking about the heightened sense of reaction or awareness. How many of us in the public safety field, military field, we go into a restaurant and we're checking out the exits, we're checking out all the points of entry, we're checking out but our back is never to the door. Anywhere we sit in the restaurant, we're checking out what everyone's doing. So that heightened sense of awareness, whether you can say it's a protective side, sure, yeah, maybe people who aren't in public safety do that too, but I feel like it is extra in this field. But that's bringing your work to dinner, out to dinner. You know, that's bringing work out to party. That's whatever it is. It doesn't stop, and we can justify it all we want, but.
Well, and how many of our cops in here that are listening right now understand that when you go to a restaurant, you're not there to look for warrants, but you see it. You're like, oh, that guy's got a warrant. You know, like, yeah. Is it a joke? Sure. Is it funny at the time? Sure. But you know what you're doing is you're working. You're always working. Your brain doesn't shut off. And that's, again, whether it's a 1-year veteran or 1-year rookie or a 20-year veteran, I think at some point, everyone in public safety has that moment where they forget to let go or forget to shut it off, you know? And I think, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think if it consumes your personality and becomes, it just takes over, you know, that's where the problem lies.
Yeah. You can't shut it off, and you're going to burn out really quick. What could have been a 35, 40-year career is now going to be a 20-year career because you make a silly mistake because you're burnt out. We've seen it. It happens. With that all being said, Brad, how do we fix this?
Well,
it seems impossible to me. Does it seem impossible to you?
It can be, and I think there's a lot behind it that we need to work on.
Yeah.
But how we beat it is to remember that life is short and you're replaceable in your job. You leave tomorrow, you're going to get replaced. It's sad, but it's the truth. Public safety doesn't stop because we stop. Public safety continues going. Nursing continues going. Doctors continue going. Just because we die or we retire or we get arrested or we do something stupid, someone will take that place tomorrow, right? I think realizing that your family needs you, your spouse needs you, your friends need you, and that you are better than a 40-hour paycheck. You're better than a 70-hour paycheck. it's great that you can support your family with that money, but that's not, again, it's almost about identity too, right? It's not who you are. It's what you're doing for work. And you can still make a difference with 40 hours a week versus 90 hours a week.
Yeah.
And there's no burnout there, right? There's
Yeah.
40 hours a week. Typically, you can still be stressed, but you're not going to be burnt out.
Yeah. My thing was like action beats reaction. We can say that throughout everything in this field and life, but like if you stay ahead of this, it's probably the best way to get past it, right? I mean, if you start now, you're going to be way better off in 5 years than if you don't start for another 5 years.
And so the big question is, what do we do to make this shift, right? From today, like after hearing this, from today moving forward, make a shift in your priorities. Make that change that you're going to say, like, I'll work 40 hours a week unless I'm getting forced overtime. Say no to some shifts. It doesn't hurt anybody. Remember that if you're, this, I'm going to lean towards the veteran side here a little bit more, the guys who have been on 20 years, let the new guys take some of it. I'm not saying all of it because that's how problems start, right? But, or help come up with a solution to spread it out better, amongst the entire department versus just one or two people always working the overtime.
Yeah, creative scheduling. I know someone that pushes that, and it works really well.
I do what I can.
What about? Yeah, I know. What about the home side of stuff? Like I said, action beats reaction. We're starting to get ahead of things. So if it's too much at once, how about stop and slow it down to one thing? This week, focus on getting a better sleep. Work on your sleep schedule. If you can do that this week, great. Next week, work on your routine to, make better eating habits.
Yeah, interesting.
One thing at a time.
I just actually did a Facebook post about that today, talking about work, life balance and morning routines, I guess. Morning routines are important, but so aren't nightly routines. And morning routines can be the people who work 8 to 4 and sleep 9 to 5 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But morning routines can also be those people that work 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And now you have a nightly routine at 6 a.m., but your morning routine is actually in the afternoon. It's interchangeable, right?
Mm-hmm.
But having routines is extremely important because you can get, and if you're okay with 5 or 6 hours sleep and your body tells you that that's fine, do that. But make sure you have, when you're waking up to a routine, and you're not going to leave from that. You're not going to step off from that unless there's an emergency, right?
Set a routine. It's easy to get in those bad habits.
Oh, absolutely. And it's easy to say, like, oh, the snooze button one more time won't hurt anything. I'm terrible with my snooze button, but
we've all learned that lesson, I feel like, a time or two.
So, what you do is you keep your spouse. You stay in touch with your kids. You don't let the work come in between you, right? Mm-hmm. You give your home life the most amazing part of you that they can possibly get. Not what's left. You should provide to them first, and then, and I'm not saying you should give your work leftovers either. There's a way to balance it out. But remember, you're not working to live, right? Or, I mean, you are, but you're also not living to work. It's a catch-22. However, what's not a catch-22 is the little eyes that are staring at you when you come home from a long shift, or the spouse that just might need you to ask how their day was, or the friend who's going through a rough time and now but they don't work in public safety, but you do, so you're more stressing them, right? Give them the time of day. Be a friend, right? Allow them to vent about their problems, no matter how small they may seem. We're always comparing ourselves to others because of what we do.
Yeah. So, and I feel like we all expect people to think we're superhuman, but when in reality, nobody really expects that. They know we're human. We're the ones that forget it. So it's driving home that we're human. Don't forget it.
Right. And I think that when you do remember that you're human, deep down, you start to miss that normal human interaction. So what you can do is make plans on your days off with an old friend, whether or not they're in public safety. Doesn't matter. Go grab lunch with them. Go play pool. Go do what you do or what you used to do.
Just shoot them a text.
Right. Right. And the biggest one, I guess, is because this is all about work-life balance, learn to say no. You can say no respectfully, right? There's overtime. There's going to be overtime opportunities forever. You can say, no, I've got plans today. Thank you. If you get forced, whatever, so be it, right? You can't control that, but you can control the voluntary overtime. You can
Not your
control
responsibility to fill.
You can control how many details you pick up. Like we've got a lot of our deputy friends who work that special detail. They'll work till 2 a.m, go home, sleep for 4 hours, come back out and work another 8 hours. Like, you don't need to do that. The money's great, I'm sure. There's nothing, especially in today's day and age, but learn to say no, take care of yourself, and make those plans. Enjoy those days off. Get that extra hour of sleep.
Prioritize yourself for sure, and your family. What's
That's how you
important to you?
balance your work and work-life balance. That's how it happens. It starts now.
Yeah, money comes and goes. I know it's hard to think sometimes, but it definitely comes and goes.
And there's solutions around all that. We'll get into that. We'll get into, at some point, I'm sure we'll talk about financial stressors more. We'll talk about, the substance abuse more. We'll talk about the spousal abuse. We'll talk about everything on this podcast, but we're going to start a little bit lighter than that right now. But
yeah,
early on,
those are the
easiest,
important one.
right? Work-life balance. So
yeah,
we want to take another minute to thank you guys for listening. And we ask that you share, you like, you follow. Only like it if you like it, but we appreciate it. Follow it and share with as many people as you possibly can. Spread the word, especially in our public safety field, in our nurses and our military. Get it out there for those who work shift work, and let us
to their family members too.
Yeah, and help us spread this word and this mission to other people. This is what we want to do. This is what we're here for, and this has been a blast so far.
Yeah, it really has. It's been nice to loving the interaction we've been receiving on some platforms, Facebook. People telling us their stories, people giving their input. It's been huge. It's been so nice to see that they're not just listening and it's going out in one ear out the other. People are actually feeling the effects of this, and that's what we want. That's what we want to continue. So thank you.
And thank you very much. And we're open to suggestions. If anyone out there listening has an idea of what they'd like to hear us talk about, dig into a little further. We'll be talking about interviews at some point with certain folks, and those will be on special days. But our plan as of today, we've actually just talked about it. We're going to start looking at releasing a new podcast every Tuesday now instead of bi-weekly.
Yep.
So that's exciting. So
absolutely.
But for now, we thank you again. We appreciate you. We love you all, and we ask you to stay
resilient.
Peace.